and welcome to another episode of Crack of Dawn. And with me tonight is Joe. So Joe's a member at Dawn, has been for a little while. How long now for?
4 months.
For 4 months. And there's a specific reason we've got Joe on the podcast today. It will all come clear as we go along. Yes. But let's start with the easy stuff first. Why don't you start with just telling us more about yourself?
I'm a nutritionist. So I'm Polish. I moved into the UK over 6 years ago. I studied back in Poland, studied nutrition dietetics for 5 years, so masters, and then post-grad I did nutrition coaching and the psychology of nutrition. So that's the education. And then I got here, started working for the NHS straight away, so 6 years.
Okay. Were you kind of recruited by the NHS to come over, or was this kind of just like wanted to do a bit of traveling and discover more of the world?
It was traveling. It was I always wanted to live in London for a little bit just to experience it. I was thinking of staying here for 2-3 years. It's been 6 and probably it's going to be much longer. So I came here, started looking for a job with NHS straight away, just because I wanted to work somewhere, legit.
Yeah. And how's that going? How's the job with the NHS going?
It's been a good adventure. It's been a good learning process. So when you graduate, you don't necessarily you think you know a lot, but you don't. Yeah. As soon as you start working, you find out that you just don't know much. Yeah. And so I started working for an oncology hospital first in Chelsea. So cancer patients, that was quite a challenging one.
Oh, wow, yeah,
but,
of course.
A good experience as well. Then I worked for King's College Hospital for many different wards. So there was elderly ward, there was trauma ward. So that was quite a broad experience as well. And now I'm working for a remote service that NHS provides for people with diabetes and people with obesity.
Oh wow!
So
okay.
Two different.
So that's your current main focus is mainly people suffering with diabetes or probably pre-diabetic.
Yes.
Yeah. And
absolutely.
leading up to diabetes.
Yeah, exactly. So the program is called Diabetes Prevention Program. So pre-diabetes mainly, so it's 2 separate programs. One is diabetes, pre-diabetes. The other one is obesity. So with patients that I work with who have obesity, they very often have diabetes as well. And,
of course,
and
it's kind of comorbidities, like they kind of live together, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what does a typical day looks like in the life of a NHS nutritionist? Perhaps if you can, I think just for interest's sake, we all always have family members and stuff, so there's always something a bit interesting about this. Just maybe on the oncology side of things, like what was your main job then, and then looking through the time that you've been with the NHS, how does a day differ perhaps between wards? And then obviously the big one for most of us is just this diabetics and obesity, and like what does that look like?
Yeah, the way I work now is a completely different world to work in a hospital. So obviously I work from home now because it's a remote service, so it's very convenient, completely different to working on the ward. So when I worked in a hospital, you would come to work, you'd get the list of patients that you need to see for the day, and it really depends on the patient. So some of them would be going through the treatment already, some of them would be pre-treatment, some would be post-treatment, so it really depended on a patient. At that point, we would more focus on keeping the weight on rather than weight loss. So trying to help them, stay as healthy as possible. So trying to prevent that weight loss by all means at all costs. So that was the main goal. And then,
what would you do for a client that what kind of prescriptions would you guys deliver for somebody to kind of like keep on that kind of weight? Does that become quite caloric dense?
Yeah,
in the intake?
It is completely. So again, complete opposite to what I'm doing at the moment. So it is encouraging them to eat as many calories in as little volume as possible, because they very often struggle with with appetite, with taste changes, so they wouldn't want to eat, they wouldn't be able to eat, so you have to provide as much nutrition as in as little food as you can. So it would very often be very high calorie products. It would be full fat dairy, it would be double cream, it would be everything that you would advise against normally. And then it would be nutritional supplements as well, so drinks that one drink like that is a calorific value of a Snickers bar, for example.
Gotcha. So just high volume. So if there's any hard gainers at Dawn right now that's been trying everything to put on weight, you would definitely have the secret sauce, the best shake for them to have. You can concoct something for them to start building some muscle.
Absolutely, absolutely. I wouldn't still recommend, eating double cream and ice cream and things like that. But yeah, there are ways to gain weight in a healthy way. Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. So that's more like gaining weight and obviously keeping people as healthy, and then now you're moving through more towards looking after what it is that you're actually eating. So what's the common misperceptions that people have, and perhaps clients that you see, that might think that they're actually healthy, and then once you actually start delving a little bit deeper, they realize that's not? What's the common things you see? Is it just plain ignorance?
Yeah, I think a little bit of it is just lack of education, lack of knowledge. Things that I came across probably the most frequently is, maybe because I'm working with diabetes patients, is avoiding fruit and the sugar in fruit. And I have so many patients who would say, I was told not to eat fruit because of the sugar, and then they, end up eating chocolate bars and biscuits and things like that. And you ask yourself, where did you get that information from? Because, fruit it does have natural sugar, but it has fiber, it has vitamins, minerals. It is a healthy product. It is a healthy,
it's a natural
thing to eat.
food. Yeah,
that would be one. So of trying to avoid fruit just because of the sugar content, and trying, thinking that is unhealthy. What else? Very restrictive diet. So starving. People are, trying to starve themselves because they want to lose weight, and it's very, very drastic. So many people come to me and say, I'm barely eating anything. I'm eating, I'm not eating breakfast, eating salad for lunch, and that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all I have during the day. And then, they're wondering, why do I not have energy? Why am I feeling so bad? Why can I not focus? And it's all they know. They know diets, and diets mean, 1,200 calories and less. Yeah. And it's just so difficult for people like that to understand that a healthy diet that can support weight loss can mean that you can eat more than that.
Do you find a lot of this is influences from obviously what people see in the media, the pressures that people get in the media on having to look a certain way and maybe perform a certain way? And I think even in CrossFit we can be guilty of, there's a certain image that we conjure up when we think about a healthy CrossFitter. And then you can look at yourself and you might feel inadequate that you're not there, or you're not looking like that person. That influences what would you say to anybody that struggles with this and could say, well, I want to look like X, Y, and Z? What would be like key advice that you would give them?
Patience.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. I think because I guess we don't have patience with anything these days, and people are really rushing, and especially if it's somebody who's tried so many different diets and they're just impatient. They're like, I want to get there. I tried so many things. I'm tired. I'm frustrated. I want to get there. And, they don't have that patience. They don't think that, okay, it took me a number of years to get to where I am weight-wise. It's going to take just as long, if not longer, to lose that. So I think it's that, having that awareness that it is going to take time, and if it's going to be sustainable, it needs to be slower than 2 weeks on a crash diet, and that's it.
Yeah, and I think we've all fallen victim to those kind of crash diets. Like even if it's not 2 weeks, it's that typical 21 days. Like your typical 3 weeks towards something. And I think sometimes, and we've even done this at Dawn before, where we'll say like, hey, we've got this diet thing or this little group that we're going to run, and then after a certain time we go and celebrate with hot dogs or something really like donuts or something as woo, you've done really well, you've lost all the weight. Here's a donut as a treat, and then all of a sudden we're kind of like clicking on that cycle again. And I think this is more for the benefit of the members as well. And again, if we can get some value out of this, even if it is not for themselves but for their family members and stuff, if you start looking at anybody that's pre-diabetic, what would be some key things that you would like to convey over to these people where we're still in a position where we're pre-diabetic, we haven't done the real damage yet, but like all the signs are moving towards that, the blood sugar levels are showing this. What can people do? Like, I would hate to put it into 5 easy steps, but what's a handful of easy things that people can start doing already now, or even to some of our listeners who might have a family member in the house that's pre-diabetic? What can they start suggesting on an easy way to kind of start steering that ship towards a more of a healthier lifestyle?
It shouldn't be a diet, because like you say, as soon as that's over, we're back to bad habits. So it needs to be little changes in lifestyle that will adapt. So I would say one would be focus on carbohydrates and the type of carbs that we are choosing. So rather than those processed, white bread, white pasta, white rice, just trying to choose those wholemeal bread, brown rice, brown pasta. So anything that is less processed is better, because it wouldn't cause that spike in your blood glucose level. So that would be one thing. Trying to avoid unhealthy snacks or sweet snacks, that would be another thing. And I see that again very often, where people are trying to limit their calories, limit their they make their meals really small, and then they tend to get hungry in between the main meals, and that's when they tend to snack. Yeah, exactly. So, and that's something to work on as well. Have bigger meals, but avoid snacks, or have a healthy snack, have a handful of nuts, or have a piece of fruit. Something that many people. Yeah,
it's something I try to like. If anybody asks me to have a handful of nuts, I can't. Like the moment I've had a handful, I was like, oh, that's only stop. But you don't realize how dense nuts actually are in fats and stuff. Easy wins, easy substitutes. I hate to do this to people, but obviously somebody's screaming at the screen right now. Like somebody that's drinking 3 or 4 or even 5 colas a day, or what's the easy substitutes? Because people go, I love the gas he drinks. What can we substitute? What can we do to kind of help make those kind of decisions a bit more responsible?
I guess that's quite a tricky one, because it's something that you used to, because you drink it frequently, right? And the good thing is that our taste buds change quite quickly. So it might take 3 to 6 weeks for our taste buds to change, to start appreciate a different flavor. So very often, when I work with patients, we work on reducing sugar, for example. So instead of saying, somebody's adding 2 teaspoons of sugar to their tea every time they drink tea, and so instead of saying, stop that straight away, we say, reduce to 1, reduce to half. And then, they get used to that different flavor. And then, after a month, after 2 months, they say, I added sugar to my tea and it's horrible, it's too sweet. So I think it's, again, giving yourself time to get used to different flavors. And, Coke, maybe adding some squash to sparkling water just for that flavor. I think just trying to find those different flavors. It can still be something sweet-ish, so squash, sugar-free squash, something that you add to sparkling water.
Talking about, just from, obviously, you can only talk about your own experience, but what have you seen gets people into those positions? Is this kind of families and, almost, their parents were not well educated into food and therefore they are not well educated into food? Do you find that a lot, or do you see that there's a whole new different, groups of people, social media playing into it? Like, what do you guys see from the sheer amount of people that you see? What's kind of the causes for these kind of things?
Yeah, I think definitely family. Absolutely. I would agree with that. So again, lack of education. So if somebody grew up in a family where anything is, on the table, there's fast food, there's takeaways all the time, they will continue doing that when they have their own families. Social media, that for sure. All of the different diets, all of the, different nutritional information in the internet, so many different approaches, so many different, studies that one contradicts the other. It's like, what do I believe? Like, what is true and what is not? So I think that confusion as well, people just don't know what to do, how to approach it. And like I said, so many people have that background of the yo-yo dieters, so they have tried everything and they just
almost
don't know
like
what
a
to
diet
do.
fatigue. They've been through everything that they
absolutely,
just give up.
Absolutely. I would say these things.
Can we put a couple of myths to rest today, hopefully? Obviously you're quite versed at this, so I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but I'm going to ask you a few things, and I just want to get your view on that personally. Views on detoxing. Is detoxing real? Is a detox diet, are those real? If not, what's a better option than to go for a 3-week detox?
I think it depends on what we're talking about. Like, I'm not a fan of any kind of like juicing, fasting, juice fast or something like that. Detox to me would mean eating as little processed foods as possible. Yeah.
Okay.
So make it wholesome, make it as natural as possible. That to me is detox.
wow.
It doesn't mean, starve yourself for 3 weeks or, just survive on
Only
fruit
allow
juice.
yourself juice. Yeah.
Exactly. I probably will have many people who will, say this is bullshit. But
this has worked for me. How dare you?
Exactly.
How dare you tell me?
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But I think, if you want to detoxify your body, just try to eat as natural as you possibly can.
Yep. I think there's also we're still on track with the basics of all of this. Is really just, you want to lose a bit of weight, you got to take on less calories than you use during a day. It's that simple. Or maybe up your burning more calories than you take on, if not by intake but by expenditure. We can just up that. That's basically the foundation of any good nutrition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And it is that simple. The trick is, the quality of the food that you're choosing. Because if you choose, if you say your goal is 1,500 calories, if you get that from donuts, you're going to be hungry. Your body will, let you know, I'm not getting enough nutrition. I'm hungry, right?
Yeah.
I need something extra. But if you fill that 1,500 calories with something that is actually, nutritious and healthy, you won't feel that hungry. You probably won't feel hungry at all, just because you are giving your body what it needs. So
another question for me, just because I love this kind of stuff, I can talk about this forever, but how would you, if somebody comes to you and go like, I need to lose weight, how would you establish, this has always been an interesting thing for me, how would you as a professional establish what their caloric intake should be? How do you understand what a deficit would look like? And maybe just leading on to that, what would be a healthy daily deficit for somebody so that they can actually sustain fat loss?
There are ways to calculate that, but it doesn't always work. If somebody's been on many diets, their metabolism might be affected by that. So you can come up, you can calculate it and you can come up with a perfect, equation, perfect result, and then they're not going to be losing weight because their metabolism has been so screwed by all the diets. So you work with them on, very often you have to kind of re-feed them, so get them to eating a little bit more of the healthy stuff, and get to that maintenance first on the calorie goal that you want them to be.
Yeah, so almost substituting the shitty foods for healthier foods, and just go through that process first, and then get them to a baseline. Okay.
Yeah, and then once you get them there, you can think about introducing some kind of a deficit then. That would be a long process, a long way around. Usually just introducing, some kind of, I don't want to say too much, but even, 200, 300 calories below their requirements would already make a difference. And especially, if it's somebody who's training, you don't want to make that deficit too much.
Because they need the energy to train, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. So again, when we start talking about the journey of weight loss, I think most of us, for whatever reason, will always hark back to like that typical, it will either be a 21-day reset detox. So we expect something, quite dramatic in 3 weeks' time. I think anybody that comes from the traditional gym environment or perhaps have played with bodybuilding or anything like that before and really dialed in nutrition. And personally, I think that some of the athletes that's got nutrition totally dialed in are bodybuilders. So if you ever have a bodybuilder friend, they know exactly what's going on, right? But even for them, the quickest shred that they can look at would be something around an 8-week program. That for them, that's quick. How would you communicate to normal CrossFit athletes in actually establishing a lifestyle, and that this is not a 4-week thing? This is not necessarily, yes, of course you can have a kickstart, and we are going to have a kickstart, which we can start setting some habits in place that can be 4 weeks and then with a check-in. But that is literally what it is. It's a kickstart. It's just starting everything off, but it has to be continued. How do you communicate this to people that get so frustrated with quick results and wanting to see quick results?
I think I would use their experience. So I would speak to them about what they have done before. So if they have done any diets before, I would refer to that. So, how long were you doing that for? What results did you get? And then how sustainable those results were. So how fast did you gain your weight back? And I think that is quite something that really means a lot to people, because they think, yeah, that's right. I've lost weight within those 2-3 weeks for however long it was, but then I've gained that back in a week and even more, even more weight. So,
and what happens then? Usually, what's kind of the physiological reaction there? How is it that people gain that back and sometimes more? Because we always hear that usually when they're gaining back, it's more. What actually happens?
Process of it is quite complex. So, obviously, when we limit our calories, our body goes into starvation mode. So it's trying to store as many calories as possible, just because it knows that it's not going to get much food in a coming, day, week, however long. So it's trying to save as many calories as possible. And then when we start eating again, we very often eat more than we did before, just because we are hungry. We need food. And then at that point, our metabolism is slower, just because it's trying to save that energy. So that makes it a little bit more, difficult for people to...
And then people kind of like, and it's almost like the body wants to kind of like just grab now for the next
exactly.
small
It's
season,
getting prepared for the next fast.
Yeah. We can talk on fasting. Under what circumstances do you think that might be a good idea? And under what circumstances do you think it really isn't?
It really depends on your schedule. That's one, how busy you are. If you want to do it for longer than, just the night time, if you want to skip breakfast, then it's best if you're busy in the morning, if you're not thinking about food. If you're if you're a person who's usually not hungry in the morning, that's great. Then you can skip breakfast, go to lunch. I would say the worst, and also the energy levels. If you feel like you don't have any energy without breakfast, then just don't do it. If you're okay without having breakfast and you're okay, your performance is fine, then it's very individual. It depends on how you feel, whether you can manage it or not. I would say that the time to avoid it is, and I had many cases like that, people with eating disorders, people with binge eating, where that restriction in food, so when you're trying not to eat, leads them to be, so hungry that then they end up binging. And
taking on the sheer amount of calories again that they try to avoid.
Yeah, and then very often that is, it's also that black and white thinking for somebody like that who, they say, it's Monday today, I'm starting a diet, so I'm not going to eat. So they're not eating until let's say lunchtime, and they get so hungry they end up binging in the evening, and they think, okay, so I've eaten that cookie, 5 cookies, so I'm, the day is wasted already. I might just as well eat everything that.
I don't think there's a single person that hasn't had that thought in their head. I'll start again next week, Monday.
Like, who cares?
I can't start tomorrow. I'll start next week, Monday again. So now it's just a write-off.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you know that you have habit like that, or you have some kind of a disturbed eating disorder, then that's probably the worst idea to do.
As a nutritionist, if I'm going to create a little bit of a scenario here for you, and I'm sure you can guess what this will be. If we look at it, your typical Dawn member, and let's imagine that they've joined us in the last 3 months or so. So they've gone through their whole foundations. They've seen some really good results in the beginning, especially just, and a lot of people do when they just start moving, because people might just not have moved. So all of a sudden they're expending a bit more energy a day. They're feeling better. They're starting to look stronger. The level method is helping out. They can see clear progression. But the one point where they don't really see those kind of results is probably in the mirror, or even worse sometimes when they stand on the scales. And, we always get this feedback on that, I'm actually weighing more now than I used to. And we find that a lot with our female members. What would your advice be? How would you, your nutritionist, they come and see you and they go like, Joe, I'm now here, like I'm enjoying CrossFit, I'm loving it, it's lovely, the camaraderie is great, and I've seen some results in the beginning, but now it's just plateauing. I just can't get rid of this beer belly or this, saggy bum or whatever it is that people come to you with. What would you, as a nutritionist, prescribe for them, and how would you kind of deal with that?
I think the first thing is to have that conversation about their goals, what they want to achieve, because maybe they want to stay where they are. If they do, great. If they want to progress, whether it's weight loss, whether it's performance, then we would have to, have that conversation. What do you want to achieve? What is your routine at the moment? So what are you doing? What are you eating? And then we can work on improving that. So trying to focus on, getting enough nutrition, getting appropriate nutrition to support you with that performance and with that, like I say, level method. If you want to level up, we need to, make sure that you are getting enough energy, enough nutrition. It doesn't mean that you're going to gain weight if we're, if we're going to try and add energy into your diet. It's just, when we're going to add that energy and what from we're going to add that energy. And I think working on that specific plan in terms of, goals, timing, quality of food as well, that's all that needs to be there. And you mentioned weight, scales. And it's not, I'm no fan of scales either. So it just doesn't, it's not a good reflection of what is happening in your body or with your body. So I think measurement, it's one, looking at how your clothes fit, because you probably are going to see the difference in your clothes as well, even if your weight is the same on the scales. It's just because you are recompositioning your body. Your body composition is going to be different. You're going to gain muscle, you're going to lose fat. So even if the number on the scale is the same, you are most likely making progress and changes in your body.
Excellent. So obviously alluding to a future kickstart that we're looking at, it's probably going to kick off for us on the 1st of September. There'll be more information leading up to the 1st of September. But obviously we're not going to use scales. We've got a lovely new in-body scanner that will give us way more information through, your skeletal weight, the water that you retain, your muscular weight, how much fat you have on your body, which will obviously help with those measurement kind of things. How often would somebody need to kind of really check in on those kind of things? That's healthy, because again, I can already probably in my head name about 15 members that would try and live on that scale, twice a week and make sure that everything is going the right way. What's a healthy kind of relationship to have with measurements and scales and checking in?
Every couple of weeks is already, quite a lot. So once a month, I would say is a right frequency. With weight, obviously, people tend to jump on the scales all the time, every day, but there's so many factors that can affect that, water retention, the amount of food that they eat, so many factors. And with body composition, it's not affected by, what you eat, how much you eat on a day before. So I think every month would be probably a
good place to be.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we was to create, in your view, nutrition support system, if there's an athlete comes to you and they, Joe, here's my money. I need to lose weight around my belly. I'm strong. I'm doing all the workouts, but when Joao takes his shirt off, I just feel like I can't do the same thing because I still don't look the same. Give me a Joao six-pack. How would you go about doing that? And what's a realistic timeline that you would probably want to put into place with somebody that shows up about, let's say, 5 times a week or so? So they're quite regular in their fitness.
That's quite a lot, So there is a lot of training. I think, again, focusing on quality.
This person doesn't exist, by the way, and it's definitely not me. Yeah,
not me. One day. Working on quality of food. I quite like to work on macros as well.
Talk to us, because there might be people listening now that doesn't always understand what the difference is between macro and micronutrients, just what that is, and just name it for people.
Yeah, so macronutrients is protein, carbohydrates, and fat. So,
and what is the protein? Protein is... How do you describe protein?
Block, let's say, that is built out of amino acids. It's quite complex, and
most of that is found in,
I would say, animal products. But because I'm a vegetarian,
I
have to say that there's also plant-based sources of protein, which are absolutely great. Animal products, anything like eggs, chicken, meat, fish, dairy, and obviously plant-based. Beans, lentils, tofu, peanut butter, nuts, anything like that. So loads everywhere, broccoli, vegetables. There's loads of protein in things that people just don't think there would be. Macros, so trying to focus on protein intake carbs intake, like I said, that's our preferred source of energy. So it needs to be at the right level. So carbs, fat, healthy fats, nothing wrong with fats. People shouldn't be
I think that's another thing is if you can just quickly talk about fats. What's those common kind of animal and plant fats? Obviously, with animal fat will be the fat that's on the meat. I take it, or in eggs there'll be some fat. In eggs, but on plants as well. Nuts is our main source.
Yeah. Nuts, avocado. These are quite high in fat, and that probably would be the main. Nuts, seeds, avocados, oil, obviously olive oil. With animal products, dairy as well, and dairy, especially with when it comes to those saturated, those less healthy fats, that's quite a big source of those less healthy, unhealthy fats. So anything like cheese, milk, things like that.
Don't tell it to the Dutch person in me. Like I love cheese. Can't stay away from cheese.
No, absolutely. But everything in moderation. That's what I like to say. So.
Okay. So those macros. So you would start focusing on those macros then with the person.
It depends on the person. Depends on how committed they are or they want to be. If there's somebody who wants to count calories, macros, great, because then we can be more accurate. If it's somebody who's just too much work, working 2 jobs, having children, whatever it might be, if they don't have time, we can work more on portion sizes, on proportions on the plate, in that on that balance in the diet rather than on the numbers. So it really depends on what a person is.
Yeah, what they can and cannot.
What they can do.
Yeah. Excellent. Timelines on that. Obviously, it's a fair assumption that if somebody comes in and they dialed in and they're on MyFitnessPal and they can send you and they get like, here's everything I've had over the last week and I'm hitting my macros and I'm doing all of that. They're going to see results way quicker than somebody that is kind of still eyeballing a few things.
Yeah.
But both it's not necessarily one is worse than the other one. It's just how quickly you want to see your results.
Yeah. And I think it never happens though. If you go to MyFitnessPal or any other app and you get that calculated. Okay, if you eat 1,200 calories, you're going to lose 10 kilograms in however long, 5 weeks. It never happens. So you have to give it more time. I would say if you want to do it healthy, if you want to continue training and improving in your training, you have to do it
moderately, slowly.
So I would say probably if we're expecting 0.5 kilogram weight loss a week, that is already a lot.
Okay. Yeah.
So
about a pound a week is quite. That's kind of top end of weight loss.
Yeah, that is already quite a lot.
Yeah. So what will you then say to somebody that goes like, this is like 6 months down the road. I just don't think I can hack it. How can we not sell wellness to them, because I think we all try very hard to do that, but how can we keep on encouraging? What kind of systems would you put in place if you know that somebody would need that kind of help, or somebody realizes that listen, this is going to be a long journey, I don't have that motivation myself? What could you put in place as a nutritionist to kind of help them?
They don't have motivation because they think of it as a diet, and they think about another restrictive, another crash diet that they can sustain for 2 weeks and that's it. And I think it's just making them aware that it is going to be a lifestyle, a new lifestyle. And so that's why the changes are slower. That's why the progress is slower. But it's so much easier to maintain that long term. All those small changes, so it doesn't have to be, changing everything at the same time. It can be, reducing your snacks 1 week and then, introducing more protein another week, and just making those small steps until you achieve that. And I think it's just so much easier to approach it that way, not to think. That's why I don't like to use the word diet. When I speak to my patients, I always say, what is your eating pattern? What is your, let's talk about nutrition. I avoid by all costs the word diet because it's just, it brings negative,
connotations to it straight away. Yeah,
absolutely. So just treating it as a lifestyle.
Inevitably, there's always the big seasonal issues, right? Oh, Christmas is around the corner, or I'm going to go on this all-inclusive cruise because it's a summer holiday. For some people, it's been Ramadan and we see a lot of people doing really well during Ramadan, or actually even picking up weight during Ramadan because of their eating patterns and the amount of energy dense foods that they have right in the middle of the night. What would you say to these people when you've got these big events coming in? Like, what's key success plans to kind of like get away from the excuses that, Christmas is around the corner, maybe I'll start in the new year? How do you work your way around that?
Everything in moderation. So if somebody's on a diet, they have that thinking process of, I'm not going to be able to eat that for X number of weeks. And so they want that even more, right? So when Christmas comes, they are just going to stuff their faces with whatever they're not allowed to eat when they're on a diet. So I think making that, not dividing the food, into good and bad, into allowed and banned food. Anything is allowed, but in moderation. So again, it's a lifestyle. So you're not excluding chocolate forever. You're just reducing it gradually.
Like those sugars in the cup, just gradually over time, less and less and less.
Exactly. And I think also you mentioned families. And I think it's just so important to have that conversation with your family. Like if you're trying to improve your eating, if you're trying to work on, losing weight, increasing your performance, whatever your goal is, I think it's so important to like speak to the people that are around you, because it's just so much easier to do that with somebody, or just knowing that somebody
they are on board and actually supporting your actions, not trying to kind of
again,
sabotage you.
Yeah, exactly. And I have so many patients who say, I'm trying to avoid biscuits, but I'm buying these for my children, so they're always at home. So, how is it that biscuits are unhealthy for you, but they're healthy for your children? There's that, people don't necessarily think about that.
They're very weird in how they compartmentalize things. That I shouldn't be having that, but there's no issue in my children having it.
Exactly. But it's just an unhealthy product for everybody. It doesn't mean the fact that you shouldn't be eating it doesn't mean that, it's healthy for you. For your children, it's
totally agree with you on that. I think one of our biggest challenges, and as a coach, that what I've always seen is that people might be, they get super excited at the idea of something, and then the reality sets in about 5 days in, and then if that support is not there. If that either whether it's family or whether it's just a coach on the other side of a line, or whether it's a group of like-minded people, if somebody knows that, hey, there's 9 or 14 other people in my gym going through this exact thing, and there's a group, there's some sort of support group where somebody can actually just text up and go like, hey, I'm really struggling today, and getting that kind of like that similar support, chances are way higher for them to succeed than going at it alone.
100%. I think that support needs to be there, wherever it's coming from, whether it's family, whether it's a group of people who are doing the same thing, whether it's the coach. It needs to be there, because we tend to be so critical about ourselves. We tend to speak in a very negative way to ourselves usually. I'm not saying every one of us, but each one of us, but we tend to, you speak to yourself the way you wouldn't speak to your friend. And so when you have those moments where you're criticizing yourself, you really want other people to, say, you're doing really well. We're here with you. We're doing the same thing, and you want that support. Yeah.
And I think again, for us, that kind of leads to what we're trying to achieve at Dawn. So, and we've spoke about this, on our way over here tonight, that at Dawn, I think things that we've done really well in the past, in fitness, there really is, there's 2 ways we look at it. The one is there's 3 major pillars that fitness kind of sits on. And if we talk about fitness, we talk about lifelong fitness, like getting on that arc from illness to wellness to fitness. We really want to sit on 3 legs, and 2 of those 3 we've done really well in the past, which is group classes. We know that we just work so much harder when somebody's right next to us, pushing us for reps. If you're working out right next to that person that is hunting you down, you're going to push harder. You're not going to rest as long. So that always works for us. Personal training has always, worked really well for us as well. When people actually kind of sink their teeth into 1 or 2 goals, getting that pull up, even just getting those double unders, we've seen that just so much more results and comes in so much quicker when there's a personal trainer involved with clear instruction and eyes on you. But the third pillar is the one that we've always kind of struggled with, and that was nutrition. And we want to rectify this. I think we're now at a point where Dawn is really, with the level method, pardon the pun, we are ready for the next level. And our next level is introducing a sustainable product, a nutrition product into the system that people can tap into as easily as they can tap into the group exercise classes and the personal training. And that's why we are sitting here. So we're going to have that conversation. Obviously, we want to start with a kickstart to kind of get this knowledge and everything that we spoke about formalized and have a platform for people to really kind of, we draw a line in the sand. We're starting this long, arduous, difficult journey together, but it's going to be a lovely little kickstart, loads of energy in the first 4 weeks, but that doesn't mean it ends. After the 4 weeks, there will be continual check-ins by you. And guys, we're super excited about this. We really want this to succeed, and I think in Joe we found somebody that obviously it helps because she's part of the Dawn community. So you know what CrossFit is.
You know the pain.
You know the pain. You understand the workouts. You also understand the joys of leveling up and doing really well, and how much that can actually spur you on to do more.
And the support from the group as well.
And the support from the group. So I think it's going to be a place to really, for some of us that are a little bit jaded by previous diet experiences. Maybe we've tried stuff by ourselves. Maybe we've tried other products before and it just hasn't gelled, just hasn't worked out. We want to challenge people into giving September will be the start of the new academic year, so it's always a good time to start. We'll be back from our holidays and to give this a go. So there'll be more information as the time goes, getting closer to September, that we will release onto you and how you can get involved. And there will also be different types. So it might just be that some person just wants to have a in-body scan, see where they're at, check in 3 months' time and see whether what they are doing is working for them. Or it might be a bit more involved, a bit more hand-holding, a bit more kind of coaching, whether it's face-to-face or online or doing constant group check-ins. So look out for that, guys. We are super, super excited with this product. Remember, if we look at the triangle of CrossFit, the bottom is always supported by nutrition. So all the metabolic conditioning, all the weightlifting, all the gymnastics and all the sport in the world that we want to achieve will only be supported truly, and we can only execute it truly with sound nutrition. Joe, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been amazing. It's a joy seeing you also in the classes, working hard and leveling up.
Fighting
I think
my own fight.
Yeah, and also just walking the walk, and I think it's always nice for people to see that there are people in there. And maybe it's a good thing for them to see that there's a member that understands the struggles and probably has been through most of the stuff before, so could really assist.
Yeah,
we're looking forward to September. In the meantime, we've got a whole month of August with loads of things coming up, guys. Also remember, we have at the end of August we have a lovely competition, in-house competition for all the Dawners. More information will follow suit on that, but for now, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon. That was flowy, man. Yeah, like you crushed it. That was nice, wasn't it? Yeah, that was one of our easier ones.